I'm here today with Bonney and Richard Schaub, who I admire greatly. They have been my teachers in meditation, imagery, and psychosynthesis since 2010. They both have more than 4 decades experience clinically and teaching, and I'm really excited for them to share with you a bit about their book, Dante's Path. So with that, Bonney and Richard, how did you come to write the book, Dante's Path?
From my view, we heard about Dante. We knew about Dante in a general way, but we heard about it through studying Roberto Assagioli's School of Psychology, psychosynthesis, and he was inspired by Dante, and they were both Florentines, even though Dante was in the 1300s, Assagioli in the 20th century. He saw Dante as his teacher, and he integrated spirituality into psychology, and as a result, we were getting references about Dante via Assagioli, and then we went back and started to read Dante in detail, and that started some years before we even started writing the book, Dante's Path. And it was quite a journey to say the least. I'll just say one thing about it. In terms of modern day present situation, when we read Dante, remember he started writing in 1310, we realized nothing's changed. And I'm not exaggerating, we couldn't watch the late night news with all the crisis and tragedy and chaos, because we were already reading it in Dante in depth, and it was the same story over and over again about what people do to each other. So for us, it was nothing ancient or medieval about Dante. He was right up to the current day.
Especially that was also a time of a major financial crisis that was going on. What was the company? And the lowest realm of hell and the evil is greed. And I have to say, even now, today, occasionally, I'll hear somebody, the hell is the part of the Dante story that most people are familiar with. It's, Dante in hell. They don't even understand or appreciate the journey that he's describing of how you get sucked into the realms of hell and the impact it has on you, but you don't have to stay there. And that was such an interesting thing to look at the parallels of what is going on at so many different levels. But it was striking. Most translations only translate hell, the inferno. Okay. And I really, truly believe, and we'll get into this, that the aspects of the Paradiso are very nuanced and powerful and 100% cross-cultural in terms of human experience. And that created a lot of confusion, I think. So hell is definitely the most familiar one for everybody.
The other thing about hell is there's nothing religious or psycho-spiritual about what Dante's writing about. He wrote about real people in Florence creating hell during his time and named names. It was like a news bulletin. It was not some, mythical, poetic thing. He was naming people, specifics, and what they were doing to other people. So that makes it very dramatic.
So I'm hearing that you had studied Assagioli's work, that he makes that connection in his scholarship. And then Bonney, you mentioned, I think, the financial scandal of 2008. Is that when you started the book, or?
I'm forgetting the name of it. That company that
Enron.
Yes,
it was in the 90s.
Yes,
in the 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
My dates mixed up.
Yeah, the book came out in like 2002, so we were writing it in the late 90s.
Okay. And was there something specific, though, that I guess, so you've studied this work, you admire this work, you're doing this work, but what sort of was your thinking in terms of writing the book itself?
Hope,
Yes.
and also the journey, describing
Yes.
the journey, and the realism of the journey. That, I mean, just the quickest example of that, at the start of the poem, of Dante's poem, the Divine Comedy, the person who's going to go on the journey sees light at the top of the hill. It says, "Oh, I want to go up there." And his guide says, "Sorry, we got to go down first." And they go down into hell. And the teaching is, unless you study that part, all the other spiritual stuff won't mean anything if you don't understand the lower part and how to be with it. So that really got us when we understood that. It made spirituality a psychological or psycho-spiritual journey and made it real, made it, yeah, that's how things are, that feeling to it.
And even in terms of literature and the word, you know, in the Italian it was commedia, the characteristic of a comedy is that it has the ending that's beautiful and open. And they often make that comparison to Shakespeare, like Shakespeare has his tragedies, everybody's dead at the end. And Shakespeare's comedies are where people open up and experience more beauty and love. So it was not, you know, it was significant that he called it the Commedia. He didn't name, it wasn't called Dante's Inferno. It was called the Commedia because it included all the steps of the journey.
Working on this book, you mentioned, Richard, about how watching the news was painful, the experience of that. Does anything else stand out specifically when you think back of writing the book?
It was a pleasure to write it, first of all. It just flowed because we had already been working in mental health for about 15, 20 years before we wrote the book. So we already had background of all the, at least mental, emotional suffering that we got exposed to through our patients. So the writing of it just kind of flowed organically from studying 𝘂𝘅𝑗olį, then realizing Dante's support for 𝘂𝘅𝑗olį, studying Dante, and it just all kind of came out at that point. And we briefly became scholars, I would say, of Dante, in that in English, we read many translations till we found the one that really expressed it clearly, and also the translator understood what was actually being said. There was nothing poetic about it. Dante's reporting human nature. And when we finally found a translator who got that, then we stayed just on that work and read the whole thing through several times before we started writing. So that was all part of the writing before we ever put a word down.
And the part of it that was very significant also is it's totally associated with Catholicism, and it's like some kind of Catholic book. And I know, and this is not a criticism, but I mean, even in Catholic schools, that's something that is looked at. But in public school, I never ever saw a reference to it. But the interesting thing is, first of all, Italy didn't exist as a country. Okay, and there wasn't an Italian language. There was Florentine, and it was radical that Dante wrote in Florentine language, and also it was a time where there was all of these parts of Italy are at war with each other. The Florentines are killing the people in Siena, and the Sienese come in. There's so much violence and stuff that was going on that was often referred to in these very, very specific associations, because, as Richard said, it was a political statement. And he was adored in Florence because he was speaking their language, and other people were looking down on it as some, stupid language, and they're not interested. Intelligent people write in Latin. That was the only common. So the fact that he spoke and wrote about people in that way was radical. And then this was very interesting. We were teaching this to a group, and we were talking about the politics, and one of the people in our class who loved Dante was a nun. And she said to us, she said, "You don't get it." I said, "What do you mean?" "His guide was a woman." And the woman is the one who brought him up to heaven, because she knew. And because they always talk about it as it's like some kind of sexual thing, and he was in love with her. He didn't know her. He saw her as a child, but he was opened up spiritually from the beauty and loving experience. And so he followed that for the rest of his life. But it had never occurred to me in a million years until that nun said it to us. She said, "Yep, we really like her."
So thinking about this then importance, Bonney, thank you, of language and gender, that's also really important and interesting. Richard, you mentioned about a specific translation that that worked for you in English as you were working on this. I'm curious what that is.
Yes, it was by Mark Musa, M-U-S-A. And again, we read, I don't know, I'll make it up, 10 translations, and his was so superior because he understood it at a way others apparently didn't. They were treating it strictly as poetry. And Musa got that Dante's reporting experiences he actually had. When we taught in Florence, we were so like, you got to be kidding. 2 Americans are going to go to Florence and talk about Dante in the hall that Dante met in. And we thought, like, this is like crazy. So anyway, we did it. And on a break, I was speaking to one of the people in the audience. And I said, "It's kind of weird, right? 2 Americans talking about Dante." And he said, "No, you don't get it. We don't know anything about him because we heard his name in grade school and we weren't interested. You're explaining Dante to me in a way I never understood it." So that was an interesting, cross-cultural moment.
Yeah, the building that we were in, it's a small one, was a political center, and then there was an opposing political group in another part of the city. And but our colleague who brought us there, the book was a big deal in Italy. It was translated into Italian, and it was considered very significant, that a different kind of interpretation of what Dante was about. It was the first time they had seen anything written about Dante that was in that kind of personal psychological awareness and journey. And it was really interesting.
Bonney, you mentioned earlier hope was really what brought you to write the book.
Yeah.
I'm curious, looking back, what stands out about, I guess, lessons learned while you wrote the book, or any other things that you would want to share about writing the book itself?
I would say one of the most powerful messages, when Dante is being brought down into the lower realms and his guide is saying things to him like, notice all the people there, this horrible behavior that and he was emphasizing, don't put all of your energy into looking to that. Understand that you can choose to keep moving forward. But it's important to recognize all of these horrible things that people do, and don't let them sweep you into it. And there were a few characters that he would say, "Oh, look, they're getting out. They're climbing out. They're climbing out of the pit. And, how can we help them? And how can we help people to move out of that?" And you think about, look, having grown up in a community that was overwhelmingly filled with immigrants from all over the world, just because that was the nature, that is the foundation of New York City, especially in lower Manhattan. And I was so tuned in. I mean, I had students in my high school class who had been born in concentration camps. And it was just unimaginable to me. And, they were little babies, so they were carried out and they escaped. And then, and then also we had a lot of people from China. And so you see the possibility of transforming because of these amazing people. And it's quite interesting that we had a 50th high school reunion that was held a number of years ago. And, I wasn't able to go because I was teaching, but everybody got in touch with each other and was writing what they did. The overwhelming majority of the graduates of my high school at that time went into some kind of human service thing. They were teachers, nurses, doctors. And I said, this is so encouraging to me. It really means that everybody, having witnessed what we witnessed, realized that there is a way that we can help in the world. So, and social workers, I won't leave that out. A couple of people, one guy I spoke to, he became, a specialist in eyes, and he said, we have to help people to see, and it's the most amazing thing. And it was such a shocking affirmation. I wasn't thinking of that at all. When I say it's about hope, it's about letting people know that there's hope, and that's what that there's a part of them. I mean, the most important thing 𝘂𝘩𝘲𝘓 talked about was the inner wisdom, the higher self, which is what is coming out now at such a broad way in terms of consciousness. It's not only one religion, it's all of us. And every religion has their own way of addressing the expansiveness. The fact that, I go outside and I'm looking at it, it's amazing what these birds can do. And they're talking to each other. Look at that. And you just see that wisdom unfolding all around once you start to feel open in that way. So that was the other part of it. And not to mention the fact that, Florence is filled with art from ancient cultures through Rome and the Renaissance, and 𝘂𝘂𝘲𝘓 valued that, and he encouraged people to say, look around, experience what draws you, because it's beautiful nature also. And he encouraged people to find that, and he even had a particular little chapel that he said, well, just go there and see what it feels like to be there. So it was, his passion was to not diagnose. Here he is, a psychiatrist, the head of this, field there. That's hope. It's extraordinary. And I love the ultimate symbol at the end is the white rose, and the rose opens and each petal is one of the teachers. And it's so interesting because you see imagery like that in some of the Tibetan tankas. There's the vines that are going out to all the different leaves. And, these ancient symbols. Hey, it's resonant.
So your book was first published in 2003. Thinking back at that time, I'm curious how it was received and if any of the reactions or feedback surprised you.
Well, the first thing, which was delightful, is we got letters from literally around the world. We got letters from soldiers in Iraq. We got letters from Muslim imams all over it was really striking how it somehow touched various people. I guess you could call all of them seekers in some way or other. That was absolutely lovely. The other side of it is just a funny little detail. The person who bought the book, which was at Putnam Penguin, loved it, said, just write it. It's great. It's fabulous. Blah, blah, blah. and then he left. And the person who replaced him came in and said, "I'm not publishing this." So the book went on this whole journey, and then eventually, obviously, it came out. So that was just a funny. One person totally got it, the other person totally didn't get it. So that was an education. Yeah.
And we, in terms of when we went and we had the honor of being able to early on go to Florence, and 𝘿𝙩𝙗 was a very modest man. He didn't want a big, huge following. He had his little, they call it the studio for the office, and where he kept all of his notes and everything. And he did his teaching and his practice. And he had a sweet little garden right outside. And he was multilingual. So he chose to do a lot of writing in English because it happened to be the most accessible language. But he was in communication with people like Martin Buber and different Hindu people and all these different, but he did always take a lot of notes in English because it was a language that was more commonly understood. So we, fortunately, because not everybody who was maintaining his studio spoke English, we were able to go through all of his English written notes, and he was corresponding also with someone in New Jersey that we knew early on. And so we were taking notes extensively. And the thing that was really striking is 𝘿𝙩𝙗 had been a soldier, had been a doctor in World War I. And that was considered an unimaginable horror because it was the first time that people were right up in front of the soldiers and being slaughtered and all of that. And it was considered, just the most horrible experience. And then he went on and, he went on and was doing his own work, his own medical psychiatrist practice. He began, interestingly, he was born in the ghetto in Venice. And his father was Jewish. His mother was a theosophist. And very early on as a child, because his father died when he was very young, she taught him different kinds of meditation, and that helped him. So when he finally left after his father's death, he went to Florence and began to, experience that place. He didn't grow up in Venice very much. He was just young. But he went through this experience of being in the war. And then as Mussolini began to come more and more into power, he objected to people having contact with other cultures. And 𝘿𝙩𝙗 was communicating with different spiritual teachers from around the world, and he was considered that he was betraying the country and threatening Mussolini, and particularly also because he had this Jewish background too. He wasn't particularly devoutly Jewish in his life, but it formed him in many powerful ways. So he was imprisoned. And interestingly, he had already done training in psychoanalysis. He was the first Italian to study with Freud, and he also had Jung as a classmate there. And somehow he was put, this is amazing, he was put in isolation because they were afraid he would start to indoctrinate the other prisoners. They were afraid that he would do that because they wanted them to just be totally imprisoned and whatever, many of them were killed. So fortunately, at some point, he was able to be released and brought back, but he couldn't go back to his home. He had one child. He had one son, and they lived in the woods with his wife, and they just scavenged around. Unfortunately, his son became very ill, and he was desperately trying to find treatment from him. He had TB, and he even contacted Jung to find out, because there was no medical care. Mussolini stripped them of any kind of medical care, and he was reaching out to Jung. Is there some way that you can get him into Switzerland? He's very, very sick, and they weren't able to get him out of the country for care, and he ultimately died very young. So it's kind of, unfortunately, feeling like it's echoing something in terms of destroying healthcare to people. But the interesting thing was, in his notes, he was writing his notes about his experience in prison. And he wrote, "Little did they know that it was a blessing. I had a place where I could meditate as much as I wanted and relax as much as I wanted. And every once in a while, they'd slip me some food under the door," he said. And, people said it's tragic. They gave you the same thing every single day. And he said, no. He said, I ate the same thing every day anyway. But I was liberated. He said, I can't tell you how powerful it was to be there and doing my meditation and my contemplation. And I learned so much. And what was fascinating is, because all that was written in English, so many of his Italian students, the overwhelming majority of them, never knew that. So we ended up writing an article early on called Freedom in Jail, because that's what he expressed it as. Oh my God, I've been liberated. So, and then afterwards, the tragedy of his son's death. But we thought, how could you ever... This is such an amazing story.
And you touched on, Bonnie, the history repeating itself aspects, and that Dante's writings, and that your book too is sort of universal. It's the human experience. I know you've mentioned too with Assagioli, grief for his son, suffering, the timelessness, frankly, of human suffering when we think of the spiritual path.
Yes.
You published again in 2014. And I'm curious what prompted publishing the second edition.
Well, I think it was just, we loved the study that led to the first book, and we just felt like the book deserved to be available again. And we had gotten the rights returned to us from Putnam Penguin, and so we were, free to self-publish. And I think it's just a work that, frankly, we're very proud of and want to see it out there again.
But the thing, I'll just add to that, though. When we were doing the book originally, there's so much amazing art that is associated with Dante's path. Botticelli did amazing, amazing drawings where he was, in effect, explaining the complexity of the journey, and other beautiful art. There was no way we could have images in the book, but we did get the rights to the cover image, which is a beautiful painting that's in Liverpool. But then when we had the opportunity to do it ourselves, and we looked into the process of self-publishing, there was a way to introduce images into it. There was a limited amount, or else you'd have to pay a ton more, and they would need to be black and white. And then the other part of it was, I said, okay, we know now this isn't just a spiritual journey. This is a human experience. And we used a lot of Richard's brother's a photographer, and he had beautiful nature images and different kinds of current things. And we said, and that's why we had the image, was to be on top of the mountain and looking up. And we wanted it to very much reflect that this is today, that this is a story about today. So essentially, there's very little change in the written content, but being able to put images in it, for me, I'm like a huge image person, because I know that, and you know, maybe because I had a practice in New York where people could go to museums and stuff like that, people would come back and talk about being profoundly influenced. I remember Monet's Water Lilies. There was in the Museum of Modern Art, there was a huge room, 3 walls of the beautiful pond with all the water lilies. And people would say, I could just go in there and meditate. They're off the street in Manhattan and in this gorgeous garden. So I would encourage that all the time, not to, for them to pick what works for them. So it felt, I very much wanted to have the images. And then when that was over, because we thought of all of these little sections of the whole Commedia, very helpful as meditation concepts. And Richard, you remember, why don't you talk about how you were selecting them? And then we did the second book where we used the meditations and we took color images that was all pictures of Florence.
Tell me a little more about what you're suggesting.
Well, so many of the phrases that we were selecting, you said this could just be coming right out of Buddhism. It could be coming right out of all of these other traditions. These are universal concepts.
Yeah, the universality of observing human nature and how it can develop. And of course, what Dante was also teaching is it can get stuck. It can get trapped, and that's what the hell is, again. And there's realms of hell where no one can move, literally. It's a brilliant, brilliant description.
For me, one of the surprises in the book, that the lowest level of hell, right, is frozen and is trapped.
Yes.
I remember that standing out. Actually, I'd gone to a performance you did of the work, and for some reason, betrayal, and about the different levels, but the worst, frankly, level is frozen.
Yes.
That was interesting. Yeah. I have a follow-up question with the second edition of the book. So the subtitle actually changes. On the first book, it's A Practical Approach to Achieving Inner Wisdom. The second edition is Vulnerability and the Spiritual Journey.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Vulnerability is the start of everything. How you are with your human vulnerability, which is universal. Everyone, everywhere is vulnerable, because that's our nature, part of our nature. And so that's the basis of any study or learning or practice, is how to be with that fact that won't change. So how to be with it, that's part of the journey. And to never forget that that's the reason for the journey. And then, of course, realizing all the distortions and the weird ways that people come up with to try to overpower or forget or who they are at their nature. So that's why we wanted that word in there to say, no, this is the basis of studying anything, is how to be with this bare fact for all of us. By the way, it doesn't get a great reception often. I mean, one quick vignette. We taught in Florence to a room full of psychiatrists and psychologists. And on the second day, because we taught for 3 days, on the second day, a angry woman psychiatrist came up right in our face and said, I've been here for a day and a half. I am waiting for you to tell us how to get rid of our vulnerability. And one of us said as nicely as we could, that's the point. You can't get rid of it. And she went, ah! And she walked away. And she didn't come back.
Originally we had the word vulnerable in the title. And the publisher said, no way are we going to be able to sell a book that says vulnerable. Don't you see all the books that says 7 steps to perfection? He said, that's what sells. So we can't use that word vulnerable. And we started to look, and there are so many books that say 3 this or 4 that. And That's the answer. And they were just saying, you're never going to sell a book that says vulnerable in the title. So
I wonder if it's sort of, you were a little bit ahead of your time, right? The word vulnerability in 2025, I feel like, is not a surprising word, but
Yes,
you're
yes.
bringing it forward earlier. It does almost make sense to me, and I agree with you. There was that sort of mindset, right? Especially as clinicians, that you were supposed to get rid of that stuff, so you can be automaton.
You need the perfect drug. You need the perfect
Right.
this or whatever. Like,
Right.
Seriously.
So that's something I'm
I
wondering.
mean,
if,
not
yeah,
that I object to medication. I don't mean it that way, but that's what people want. Well, what should I take? Rather than, certainly look, I worked extensively with people recovering from substance misuse, various addictions. And my other nurse colleague, we were doing all the intakes. And, this was ages ago, and everybody saw all those filthy drug addicts and all of these people there. Every single person that we did the intakes with had a tragedy in their beginning. It could have been abject poverty. It could have been abuse. It could have been having a parent in the house with them who was dying, the loss of a sibling. There were so many variations, obviously racial abuse or any of those kinds of things. And we said, there's no addict personality. I mean, because they were trying to define it back then in psychiatry. It's like, what's the addict? Is this, this classic addict personality? I said, no. And so we were really passionate about it. This was my colleague, Leslie. And, she was also a psych nurse certified. And the response that we got, I mean, even because when I would get supervision, I would be emphasizing that I need to find out the vulnerable place. And it was amazing to help someone to understand that is what made them so profoundly vulnerable. Because if someone grows up in an abusive house, they think everybody's like that. I actually had a very successful young woman who had become an alcoholic, who I finally got her to go to try an AA meeting. It's free. And she came back and she said, I can't believe it. She said, my mother used to beat me every single day. I thought that was normal. And when she said something about that at the meeting, people were so kind. And she just came in and she was crying. She said, I just thought I deserved it for some reason. What was I doing wrong? And that's a very, very common feature. So that's an important aspect of it.
This is from the book's Facebook post, but two portions just to get your thoughts on something about it. I'll read it verbatim so I don't mess up your words. The Western spiritual path, still true today, was described by Dante 800 years ago, becoming conscious of all the different impulses inside us and choosing which ones to give our energy to and which ones to withdraw our energy from. It's the single most important skill to have and to teach our children, consciousness and choice. Agreed. I'm going to move to another one, which is the question is going to be about the next one. Dante understood that the repetitive patterns in our personality confine consciousness, and that consciousness expansion and spiritual breakthrough happens when we let go of our confining patterns. The inner work is letting go. The rest happens on its own because it already exists. Take a look at all the spiritual practices. One way or another, they all teach this. It's a universal insight. So thinking of that, and knowing in the book, for those that haven't read it, the book gives awareness practices, instructions for awareness practices. So in your experience, what have you found to be the most effective practices for us to build awareness of ourselves and our choices?
I would say the sequence is first identifying the negative patterns that are harming us and or harming others, and to be willing to name them. If people don't do that, that's it. It's done. The work's finished. So naming the negative patterns is absolutely the first step. The second step, and that would be a whole other level, is the willingness to let go of them. So and anyone who presents themselves for therapy or similar help is expressing some willingness, but they don't know exactly what it's going to call for them to do. But the willingness to work with a negative pattern is the second step, naming it and then being willing to work with it. And then once that's happened, it's easy to do it. It's just it's the preliminary that's tricky. Once you notice it and you can name it and you're willing to let go of it, it can be nothing more than Richard let go, Richard let go. It doesn't have to be complicated. It means when that pattern or feeling impulse rises up in me, I'm not giving it energy. That's the bottom line. I'm not energizing this. I am not going there. As people say, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. And instead you go someplace else. You replace it. That's the inner work that sets the stage for further development. And the underpinning of that is that this becomes conscious. People know this, that they're not just operating off the way something felt or the way they thought it was. They're willing to examine it and wonder about it.
And so often people think revenge is the power. And there's a lot of energy put into revenge. And one of the most wonderful aspects of helping people to recognize what the other choices are is to help them to think back of what are the things that gave me joy or gave me peace when I was little. And it's quite fascinating that I'm sure we've all seen incidences of these, like a musician or a singer who was extraordinary at, like, they're little kids. And you say, how can that child be? This is a child who has been able to connect with that amazing inner capacity. And, not everybody comes into that world in this kind of creative genius, but to recognize and accept that that's there is very important. So for so many people, music, what's interesting about music is it's a universal language. For many people, they're soothing, to be able to hold a guitar and hold it against you and feel it and listen to the tones. And the same thing with, being in nature and being able to do something. And clearly, depending on where you are, there's experiences in looking at art, like amazing art or amazing creations, that you just feel the sense of awe and enjoy it. Because, there's actually someone who learned how to do this. And there can be creative genius in terms of science and all of these different important elements. So if someone can begin to recognize what their particular strength and creative, and I don't mean creative just in terms of artistic creation, creative capacity is, it becomes a very significant part of the healing, because it's beginning to love themselves as well, love and appreciate who they are and what they can do.
Mentioned about music, and there is in your book also inspired music, a list of some of the songs that you were inspired by, or I guess you enjoyed, which I've actually made a playlist out of. So I will share that as well so people can listen to the songs. But I thought that was a unique feature of the book to have the authors include their playlist. Really appreciated that sharing. Yeah. So certainly the arts, it sounds like, have made a real connection, as you say, Bonney, with the beautiful work in Florence, the artistry of that music, nature. And Richard, you mentioned the letting go. So that is a practice that's described in the book. It's actually on page 183 in groups that I've worked with. I describe that as the fan favorite, that folks really enjoy that practice. So I encourage people who, if you're listening to this and haven't tried that and experienced it, that really is very powerful, has helped people, I know, to really feel more calm, uncomfortable in the situation they're in. We've used that. There was a study done for people with irritable bowel syndrome, so for symptom management, a study with people with spinal cord injuries for pain management, really powerful. Body, mind, and spirit, I found that really is a powerful practice for people. So certainly encourage people to check that out if they haven't already experienced Let Go.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, that was the one we taught when our practices were in Greenwich Village in New York City, and the bombing of the World Trade Center happened. And people after that were obviously traumatized, could not go down to subways, could not get on buses, and they needed to show up for work and do other things. And that was like first aid for them to do that Richard Let Go, Richard Let Go, when they were getting too anxious, just so they could function well enough to do what they had to do. So that gave it real credence for us to make sure that one gets taught, whatever else we teach. It's so simple to learn.
It's also was one of the ones that we were told the veterans that when we were teaching at the VA hospital, that was a favorite one. And there was even a little clip that we got of, and this was a Vietnam veteran, and who would get into road rage. And he learned that, and he'd say, when he'd get a sense of it coming, he'd pull over and he'd sit in the car and he'd just go, let go, let go, let go. And he said it was life-saving for him. He just couldn't understand how he got into these states, but knowing that he could get out of it was really important.
So understanding that this is a timeless, universal human story. It has been 2 decades since the book was published. I'm curious, what is your hope for the book and for its readers?
That's a great question. I think it is a way, not obviously the only way, but it is a way to take in what's going on right now in 2025 and to have a way to work with yourself, with whatever states you go into, to recognize them, name them as we're talking about, and then choosing, I don't want to stay in this state because it goes nowhere but down. So it's not escapism, it's not denial, it's recognizing and then choosing to leave a state because it's at the least uncreative and worse in terms of focusing on it. So my hope for it is that it is one of the guides people could find for how to work with themselves in difficult times. That's my continuing hope for the book.
And also people really becoming able to identify something that creates that shift. I mean, it's fascinating to me that there was enormous increase in bird watching during COVID. I mean, massively huge. And I said, that makes sense. You can't go anyplace, but you can just, rather than be mourning and grieving that you can't go here or there, that you can just experience beauty all around you. And I thought that was really a fascinating event, circumstance. It certainly helped me.
And is there anything else you'd like to say or share about the book?
Probably a lot. Well, I think we said maybe at the very beginning of this interview, when you get what Dante's teaching, you realize nothing has changed. And the, if you will, the process or the formula he's suggesting, which is how to work with these different states of feeling and different states of mind, that is still as current as it ever was. And it offers people a way to realize I can take in how the world is, and I can also find a way to be with it in a different way. Not, again, not denial, not escapism. Face it and also learn how to be with it and deal with it. So to me, the whole message of it is it's a guide for dealing with what is. The other thing I would just say in relation to giving, not that Dante's the be-all end-all, but to giving additional credence to his vision or his message, I guess you could say, is that his poem, The Divine Comedy, has had more books written about it than any book in history except for the Bible. That's something.
I'm hearing this idea, right, of it's a universal, timeless human struggle. And
Yes.
the work that we can do is sort of on ourselves, our awareness of ourselves and our responses, and then make our choices using practices such as these.
Yes.
So,
And then we get fairly good at it, then to pass that on to others.
And I think that that's an essential component of anyone who's going to work with people.
Yes.
To know
Yes.
who they are, to recognize their vulnerable places, because so often you hear something that's getting projected onto the patient that's really more about the practitioner, and not consciously, deliberately, but it's so important to be able to have that self-awareness and understand what it is that pushes your buttons. That is so important.
Absolutely crucial.
I want to thank you both
Okay.
for your time today, also for writing this book. What we're just ending on, this idea of being aware of yourself, your patterns, and having practices to be there for you. I think you've certainly given us a clear path of practices that can support us in that. So I thank you for the work that you've done. I thank you for being amazing teachers, and I'm grateful that you're teaching us this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's great. It's been great to be interviewed by someone who understands, and it's lovely. Thank you.
And someone who has a Basquiat on her wall. She's not just doing one step at a time. She's taking it all in, right?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Christine.